Now here recently, Bungie revealed that the anti-barrier mod for next season will be applicable to scout rifles and bows, and that overload mods will be applicable to auto rifles and SMGs. So we have gone out of our way to collect weapons to essentially hang on to or even farm for going into the next expansion. We're going to talk briefly about a god roll for each one of these, as well as where these weapons are dropping. So starting off with anti-barrier, we have Vision of Confluence, and preferably the TIMELOST version. Now this is a solar weapon, shoots at 180 rounds per minute, and comes with perks like Frenzy, Disruption Break, Wellspring, Rewind rounds, and also armor-piercing rounds, which actually do increase damage against barriers on barrier champions. Now this actually drops from Vault of Glass, and the TIMELOST version, of course, dropped from the master version of Vault of Glass, so it's a little more difficult to obtain. But even if you don't have the TIMELOST version, regular Vision of Confluence is still a great option for PvE. Now another weapon I want you to grab onto is another scout rifle called Eternal BLAZON. This is an arc 200 round per minute scout rifle that has some excellent trait combinations such as One for All, Disruption Break, Rapid Hit, Overflow, armor piercing rounds, and relatively easy to get a god roll of via either the Gunsmith or Roar drops, and you can even focus Umbral Ingrams through Long Shot and de-season the Splicer tab there at the helm. This is actually a really good scout rifle, guys. And again, similar to why we mentioned Vision of Confluence and Disruption Break specifically, Disruption Break works on barrier champions. It increases the damage of your kinetic weapons. So I'm a huge fan of scout rifles that have Disruption Break. Now speaking of Disruption Break, we've got to talk about Arbalest. Arbalest actually got an exotic catalyst here recently, and it got a rework this past season, in which it now by default is able to pop barriers on barrier champions. Also, it has Disruption Break, meaning it self-procs for itself. And the exotic catalyst adds Genesis, which also perfectly pairs here with the identity of Arbalest. Arbalest is without a doubt the best weapon to use against barrier champions. And I think like Arianas was probably my favorite before, and it's still one of my favorites. But Arbalest is just so good. Even without perks like Particle Deconstruction, it's still fantastic for dealing with those barrier champions. Now, speaking of some weapons that I feel like we have to bring up when we talk about not only dealing with champions, but dealing with just adds in general, are the three main exotic bows: La Monarch, Trinity's Ghoul, and Tiku's Divination. Now, these are the three main energy bows that are really amazing in all activities. I use them all in Grandmaster Nightfalls, and I know someone right now is like, yo, Cross, what about Wishender? Man, there was one time, one moment, briefly, where Wishender was an option, and that was when it was doing like double or triple damage. That is not the case anymore. To me, Tiku's, La Monarch, Trinity Ghoul, they are many levels above Wishender, and really many levels above all of the bows. Their ability to take on large group of ads down at once, La Monarch's fantastic damage over time, Tiku's Divination actually was an option we use in Nightfall's like Hollow Lair, just because I couldn't figure out a way to stop mini screeps from killing me. Tiku actually would track them, allowing me to visibly see all of those mini screeps that were coming at me. These three bows are fantastic options, and I think they're still going to be great options next season, even for barrier champions. Now, I can't bring up the three main exotic bows without talking about the three main exotic scout rifles. Now, these are scout rifles that I want you to consider outside of just Dead Man's Tale, of which we're about to talk about, and that is Polaris Lance, Skyburner's Oath, and Symmetry. Now, I bring up these weapons because, one, they're kind of forgotten about, especially things like Skyburner's Oath. I bring up Skyburner's because it really is still very good against Cabal, and you can even use it in things like the Proving Ground Strike, the cheese through certain mechanics. It's also got explosive payload, essentially, with that slug rifle perk. It's an option, fellas. It's not the best option, but it is an option. Polaris Lance, on the other hand, is actually an interesting one because it does increase damage when you tack on those precision shots. Not only that, precision hits actually return ammo to the magazine, and that solar explosion, that damage over time, can really mess with champions. And Symmetry is kind of in a similar boat as Polaris, that it gets stronger with every precision hit, but Symmetry also has that mode in which you get enough dynamic charge. This weapon essentially turns into a shotgun, a long-range, widespread shotgun, by simply requiring you to land precision hits. I just want you to consider these scout rifles, guys, as I know many of us are just going to default here to Dead Man's Tale, which takes us to Dead Man's Tale. Guys, Dead Man's Tale is so good. It's just as good inside of PvE though as it is in PvP. The weapon can roll with Vorpal. Not only can it roll with Vorpal, it can also roll with armor-piercing rounds. And by the way, Vorpal got a buff this season inside of PvE for primary weapons. Doesn't just do 15% more damage against champions and mini bosses, etc., but actually does 20% more damage. Now, the reason why this is so nasty on Dead Man's Tale is that this is actually increased with Cranial Spike. So it's scaling together, making this scout rifle arguably one of the best weapons going into next season against champions. Now, Dead Man's Tale drops from the Presage mission, and we already had a loot warning video go out, guys, but essentially it is going away, and I don't know how we're going to be able to reobtain things like Dead Man's Tale and Hawkmoon, as these exotics come with random rolls. I'm sure Bungie will disclose this to us in a future TWAP, but just to play it safe, I would highly advise getting that God Roll DMT, of which I also have. I use it in both PvE and for PvP. But that Vorpal armor-piercing round combo with Cranial Spike and its exotic catalyst, absolutely nasty for PvE. Now, moving more into some of our legendary weapons, we have Point of the Stag. Now, this is an arc bow. It's a static rolled precision bow that you can actually pull from your collections if you've already obtained it. Now, if you have not, there is a legacy kiosk in the tower right next to the vault that will allow you to purchase this bow. Guys, this is a really good bow. If you don't have a good bow, get this bow. It comes with Vorpal. It comes with Archer's Tempo. It has pretty decent draw time. I would highly advise locking this one down. Now, speaking of bows though, my personal favorite bow is Whispering SLAB. This is a kinetic bow. I have a roll that actually came with Vorpal and Archer's Tempo, similar to that of Point of the Stag. However, Whispering SLAB can actually get a draw speed down to 540 with a combination of helical, fletching, and elastic string. This is one of the fastest yet hardest hitting bows in the game. And this one drops from the gunsmith and occasionally Xur. Now, moving on to some of the scout rifles that I want you to consider. This one is a little harder to get a roll of, much less a god roll, and that is actually Vouchsafe. This is a void 200 round per minute scout rifle, and it actually has a number of fantastic perks, including Vorpal, explosive payload, rapid hit, 4 times the charm, outlaw, surplus. And with it being 200 rounds per minute, to me, it's the more preferred archetype. The problem is its drop rate is pretty bad. It drops from weekly ascendant bounties in the Dreaming City as well as the Shattered Throne, and so there's not really a direct way to farm for this one, which I know we've talked about weapons that are part of the roll loot pool, but there's so many ways to dip into that roll loot pool. Vouchsafe though really is a good scout rifle, and if you already got the roll, count yourself a lucky man. Now, moving on to another scout rifle for some of us out there that just don't have the RNG to get that nasty Vouchsafe, the Guiding Sight. This is actually the Iron Banner kinetic 150 round per minute scout rifle, which I'm personally not a huge fan of because I don't like 150s inside of PvE that much, unless they're things like Polaris Lance, right? But Guiding Sight does roll with Vorpal. It also comes with One for All, Rapid Hit, Surplus, Ambitious Assassin, and it drops from Iron Banner. Now, I know it's part of the Iron Banner loot pool and not many of us like to farm out an Iron Banner, but I find the Guiding Sight to actually have a pretty decent drop rate in comparison to things like Reese Walker, right? Like, I haven't seen a Reese Walker in so long, but Guiding Sight with Vorpal and those combinations is definitely one you can go after. Now, another scout rifle, which is also a kinetic 150, is the Scholar. Now, the Scholar, of course, is a Trials weapon, so there is an adept version of this gun. It too can roll with Vorpal. Now, that's really the only standout perk, as that first trait column doesn't really have anything there that I get too crazy about, right? Like, you have Slideways, you have Underdog. Can you use those? Yes. Should you use full auto? No. That's going to be an accessibility option next season. The only upside to the Scholar is that its adept version does have the ability to slot adept mods, similar to that of Vision of Confluence. So you can put things like adept big one, adept backup mag, etc. The downside is that this thing only drops from Trials of Osiris, and the adept version being a flawless reward. However, I will say the Scholar doesn't have that many perk combinations, so the chances of you actually getting a Vorpal roll is pretty high, at least in comparison to some of our other weapons here on this list. Now, those are the anti-barrier weapons that I want you to consider. Moving on to Overload. Now, again, auto rifles and SMGs, and immediately I jump to my 7th SERAPH Carbine. This is a kinetic 450 round per minute auto rifle. I've had this exact role now for quite some time, as it can roll with things like Vorpal, 4 times the charm, and Warmind cell creation. Now, I know Warmind cells are not exactly meta right now, but in our most recent Hive Guardians video, where we talk about ways in which to suppress Hive Guardians or Hive Light Bearers, Warmind cells has a Warmind mod that allows you to suppress enemies when shooting the Warmind cell. This is going to prove to be beneficial here going into this next season. Regardless, 7 SERAPH Carbine is still a fantastic auto rifle, especially with things like Vorpal. It drops from the Gunsmith and from Xur. Now, an SMG that I want you to consider is Escape Velocity. This is a kinetic 900 round per minute SMG. I personally have kept this one for so long, but didn't really start using mine until here recently. I like Escape Velocity over other SMGs, such as Cold Front or even Friction Fire. Those are still very good SMGs, and if you have a good rolled Friction Fire or Cold Front, by all means, break it out. But the reason why I like Escape Velocity is that it can roll with things like Vorpal, Overflow, but it also has great range for PvE. Now, this is important because there are multiple times inside of PvE where you're shooting shots off at a distance and you whip out that SMG and you realize damage fall off is so terrible, you're literally doing no damage. But because Escape Velocity does come with scopes, you can still tack on damage against champions from a distance. Now, this SMG is dropping as a raw drop and from legendary Ingrams. I get a few every now and then. Just be looking out for that Vorpal Overflow roll. Now, moving on to an auto rifle that I personally haven't even kept a roll of, but many of you swear by, and that is Arctic Haze. This is a 720 round per minute auto rifle. It deals solar damage, and it too comes with a lot of perk combinations that make it desirable. Vorpal, Triple Tap, Outlaw, Subsistence. What's crazy is I've probably only shot this weapon like 1 time. I feel like I need to go get one, which by the way, it does drop from Europa. Now, I personally like 720s in all content, even PvE, which is why I want you to consider things like CHROMA Rush. Now, I know CHROMA Rush doesn't necessarily have Vorpal on it, and we've been leaning toward weapons that have Vorpal, but CHROMA Rush is still fantastic for PvE, as well as PvP. You've got things like Kill Clip and Rampage, Adrenaline Junkie, Wellspring, in combination with Feeding Frenzy and Subsistence. So I know we're like heavily leaning toward weapons that can deal with champions directly, but if you're a fan of things like Arctic Haze and 720s, by all means, guys, grab that CHROMA Rush, which you can still farm through Umbral Ingrams through the Season of the Splicer tab, such as the Splicer Captain's Armory. Now, I know we have auto rifles on the mind, but let's go ahead and skip over to SMGs. And that is the 3 exotic SMGs, Wrist Runner, Teraba, as well as Huckleberry. Now, these 3 SMGs all have different pros for even in-game content. Huckleberry, for me, is still one of the best weapons for just shredding through ads, right? You've got Ride the Bull, you've got Rampage, these things stacking together. Very, very good. I love pairing things like Huckleberry with Devour. You literally feel like you can't die. But another exotic is, of course, Teraba. Now, this weapon comes off fairly tame until you get Ravenous Beasts, and then it's a monster. If you're on the right map and the right proximity of your enemies, Teraba can absolutely melt for you. And my other SMG is, of course, Wrist Runner. Wrist Runner deals arc damage, and let me just say, Wrist Runner saves lives. A lot of folks consider this to just be an ad clear weapon in like low-level PvE content, but I can tell you right now, guys, I've used it in Grandmaster Nightfalls. Saber Strike comes along where you're constantly taking arc damage. Wrist Runner is in my hands. And just because it has amazing offensive capabilities with that arc lightning chain, it also gives you arc resist, which is why I love using it in Nightfalls where I'm taking a lot of arc damage. Those 3 exotics, guys, key in on them, keep them in your arsenal. Now, one more SMG that I want to bring up is, of course, the Ikelos SMG. This is an arc SMG. It can roll with things like Vorpal, Threat Detector, Subsistence, Pulse Monitor. It can also produce Warmind cells. Now, the main thing that I like about the Ikelos SMG, though, is the fact that it's in the aggressive frame archetype, meaning intrinsically it has high cal rounds. That's the reason why when you're shooting enemies with the Ikelos SMG, they're getting flinched so hard. Now, I know the complaint about the Ikelos SMG is that it's a little harder to control, but personally, if you can get that down, Ikelos to me is still one of the best SMGs inside of PvE. Now, I know there's a lot of weapons that probably didn't hit this list. Again, I wanted to really target weapons that had Disruption Break and Vorpal. There are a number of other options, though, out there that'll still serve you well. I know we have options out there like Death Adder, Wolf Tone, Shadow Price, Hung Jury, Night Watch, Extraordinary, Rendition. All of those weapons are still fantastic. Again, this was primarily a list gauged at those champions. There will be another list that we're going to collect together of just weapons overall that I like the most inside of PvE and what weapons to really be locking down going into Witch Queen. So be looking out for that one. Fellas and ladies, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe. We are constantly putting out stuff on Destiny. We'll be covering everything leading up to Witch Queen, including prep guides, leveling guides, and every sandbox change that's going to be occurring over the next month. So be looking out. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.